essentially I wanted to take the moment to, we did the roll call, but to really let you see who are all the libraries that are participating in the project. We have had one change. Humboldt County has decided that they can't participate in this phase, but they may in future phases. But we're a wide group of people, a disparate group of participants that have many different kinds of collections and many different kinds of assistance or thinking that they would like to do with our consultant team. Okay, Liz, I think we're at the next slide.
Right. Well, first of all, I want to say how exciting it is to be involved in this project, and I think I speak for the other consultants. The timeline on this project is seemingly rather short. The planning began in May and early June with a kickoff meeting for the 6 of the consultants that included Robin taking us through the goals of the project and our initial planning phase. And at the same time, the libraries had already submitted their applications for participation in this project. The state library, thanks to the good work of Janet, had facilitated the selection process. And I think it must have been a very challenging process. I think there were almost 50 libraries who had submitted applications, and winnowing it down to the 25 was quite challenging. And we had arrived at that by late June. And certainly your applications and the information that you provided us gives us a good foundation of understanding where you are today and how we can further craft and develop this project. However, we are going to be meeting and talking with each of you further during the summer. We have 2 phases of that process. We've developed a discussion guide, which we sent to you, I believe, earlier this week, that we will be using during some phone interviews that Robin will be setting up with each of you individually later this week. The phone interviews start the week of the 18th, I believe.
Yeah. And our first ones we're hoping to schedule will be for next Thursday, the 21st.
Yeah, and they run through the end of July and possibly into the first week in August. And these are approximately 1-hour phone interviews, and we're hoping that by having the discussion guide in advance, you can work with others on your staff to collect some of the additional information that we are requiring for the project. There will be 2 of us on each of the calls with you, and then following the interviews, we were scheduling regional meetings, and I believe that there's 6 regional meetings, and these will begin in early August and run through early September. And these will be 3-hour on-site meetings with, again, 2 consultants. Robin will probably be able to tell you a little bit more. I think there's one in San Diego, one in LA, one in Fresno, one in San Francisco. I can't remember where else, Robin.
It's 5. The last one is Sacramento.
Oh,
and
yes.
just to add on to what Liz is saying, what we'll do is we're calling them regional because we'll be looking for a sort of common place for the consultants to be, and we'll invite each library to come and speak with us for about 3 hours to dig more deeply into your needs to develop the plans. I'd also just add too that in addition to the interviews and the regional meetings, we anticipate doing directed phone calls as well as specific kinds of issues come up. And that kind of feeds into your next point, Liz, about follow-up as needed.
Correct. And so as required, we'll do that additional follow-up, which would be phone follow-ups. And then based on the interviews and the regional meetings, we'll begin drafting the project plans. And then we'll have all of that developed by the end of September. We will have for you draft plans, and then for the State Library in Khalifa, we will have a report that will identify resources needed. And Robin will be going through that in a few more minutes, the actual products. But this is the timeline. It's a condensed timeline with a lot of work this summer, and I'd like to say in advance our thank you for the time that you're going to be giving to this project. What I'd like to speak to in a little more depth right now is the actual phone interviews and the discussion guide. We developed this discussion guide, and it has basically the full life cycle components that any digital initiative might have. We based a lot of it on the collections that we based a lot of it on the collections that you have already suggested. So we're starting out with a discussion of the collections that you've identified. So we're going to want to know more about those collections, including a pretty in-depth discussion about rights management, what rights you have to digitize, are they in the public domain, as well as how you see these collections used in support of K-12 education. The next thing is, how are you providing access to these collections? If you already have done some digitization, do you already have a digital asset management system? Are you making them available on Facebook or Flickr? As well as what future means of access your users might have identified. Then information about scanning and digital capture, metadata creation, as well as how you're making the metadata available, storage of your digital content, including how many copies you have, and then preservation. We're particularly interested in this aspect of preservation where those of you who already have digital content, have you considered a preservation strategy? If so, what are you doing? And then we're wrapping it up with what your project management approaches have been, budgeting, staffing, what areas you still might need assistance in, and then finally what kind of assessment or evaluation you've done on your digital collections or what you might see yourself doing. Robin, do you have anything more?
Oh, thank you very much. You anticipated me. I was just going to add that we also recognize that because all of you should have a copy of that interviewee guide that Janet distributed. That it's a lot of questions to go through in an hour. But so what we'll do is work with you to if you can pre-populate those questions with as much information as you have, that would be very helpful before we do the interview, and we'll be in touch with you about what would be the best mechanism to do that in terms of providing that information to the consultant team. And what I mean by that is either using Microsoft, just using Word, or using a Google document, and we can work with you to figure out what's the easiest way to create that, pre-populate that information.
Yeah, and return it to us.
Exactly. Okay. This is in a sense, this is a slide that is sort of restating the areas of the discussion guide, but I share it with you to have you understand that our consultant team is thinking about these areas very much as kind of an environment or a ecology of your information with sort of metadata, capture, storage, and discovery as being really core aspects of the project, but obviously very much impacted by selection, rights, preservation, project management, and assessment. And we're structuring the information like this for us as a consultant team as we think about your library, because it helps us start to think about what your capacity is and what your knowledge is in this area, within these areas, within a sort of structured framework. We want to help you, but we want to really get a good understanding of what your capacity and knowledge are now, what kind of staffing you have, what kind of knowledge your staff has, your technology capacity, etc., within those areas, and to really learn about your aspirations in those areas too, around where you'd like to see your library in its ability to help your users, and in a sense be able to figure out how we can help you grow and improve as individual libraries, but then also thinking about what kind of services could be provided that would help multiple libraries. So I just wanted to share this with you to let you see how all of the information you share with us, we will analyze it to develop the digital plans that we plan to have as our product in September, but it'll also help us really be thinking about this sort of ecology and what we might do to really help libraries around the state in future phases. Liz, to the next slide. So our products, I think this is another good way to sort of look at the next few months. We're going to have several webinars. We've got our first webinar today. We're launching the project. Tomorrow there'll be a copyright rights management webinar that Gretchen McCord will be leading. And we anticipate that there are going to be other webinars this summer that would be project updates, as well as other additional intellectual property rights management webinars that will come. And we're going to target those based on what we begin to see as the kinds of needs when we do the interview process. As Liz has indicated, we'll be scheduling library interviews. I'm hoping to start as early as next Thursday, but as she's described, those will be ongoing throughout to the end of July and through August. We'll have a 1 hour, I'm sorry, not through August, I beg your pardon, it'll be through the rest of July and just into the beginning of August. Our format is to have that 1 hour phone interview with 2 of our consultants. We've shared the pre-interview discussion guide, and we'll come out of that with sort of summary reports about your library and all of the libraries, again, sort of thinking about them within that larger framework that I just talked about. We're going to have the regional meetings, talked a little bit about that. Those will be chances to really dig a little deeper and work on those plans for digitization and preservation. We'll also be doing research. Our consultant teams will be doing research on services that vendors could provide around things like digitization and preservation. And we will be developing those project plans. And as Liz has indicated, we'll also be preparing a final report to the State Library to guide future phases of California Revealed. So I think that's, we're at the point now where we can answer your questions, and I anticipate that there'll be a lot. If you could send your questions via chat, that would be great. And we will then, because not everyone is on the phone, we'll then answer them or try to. Well, I think either the questions are incredibly complicated, or Liz, you and I did a good job. Liz, do you have anything else you'd want to add to this at all while
people are thinking? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So was I correct, Robin, that are you going to be calling each of the library contacts starting this afternoon about the interviews?
Exactly, this afternoon and tomorrow.
Okay.
And I'll either be calling or emailing, or probably both. Okay. So we do have a question. The question is one, which is, could we talk a little bit more about phase 2? And that's a very good question. Yes, in phase 2, what we'll do is that there'll be we have 24 libraries participating in the project, and we will make a selection from the plans that are developed, and those selected plans will then move forward into phase 2, which will then lead to digitization and preservation of those selected library plans. At the same time, what will also be working in parallel is to start a new phase of applications for wanting to participate in the program. So libraries will be asked again to apply, answering the core set of questions that Janet had sent out to launch this effort and identify their collections, the potential partners, and their relation to K through 12 teaching. We'll have another set of consultants that will be working. It's my hope that as many of the consultants we have now working on the team will continue, just because it's a good team and as well because it provides continuity. And consultants will essentially continue to work with the new applicants, and I anticipate we'll be working with the selected libraries as well as we sort of shift from planning into implementation, and that's another reason to have a good continuity. We'll be looking for, sort of mentioned it, for those places where there are services that could be developed. And I'm just speaking of that very generally because we don't know, we could project, but we're going to learn so much from you all this summer as to the kinds of challenges you face and what services might be needed. So we'll be looking to identify those and pilot some of those as we can. We also are planning to pilot a repository that would be essentially to build a repository, and I'd say again, pilot it, but to build and implement a repository to manage digital assets that are created as a result of California Revealed for discovery and long-term access. It's something that we're just beginning to do some thinking about, and I think presents some really interesting opportunities, again, to work with the libraries as we would use it as a place where we can manage digital assets for access again and for preservation. And then we'll also be looking at thinking about exploring options for life cycle management. And by that, I mean really long-term preservation, full preservation. I hope that answered your question, Monique. All right. The next one is we have identified cultural institutions that wish to collaborate with us. Should they be participating in this early part of the planning process? I would say yes. And we can talk more about that when I call you to schedule the interview. Just making a note there. The next question, will collections be selected from all 25 libraries for digitization and preservation? And the answer is no. There'll be a subset of libraries that are selected. The next question is, should we contact our partner institutions to obtain a more detailed description of the photos they have as they relate to the collections we submitted? And that's yes, and that definitely, I think, is a good follow-up to the previous question about wanting to involve the partner institutions, the cultural institutions, in the effort. And we can, I'm just thinking we can, again, talk a little bit more about that when I contact you to schedule the interview, about bringing them into that interview process as well, because it would be wonderful to have them there. The next question is, if a project is selected for phase 2, will funding be provided? And that's correct. That is the idea, that as you would move to phase 2, the funding would be made available for digitization and preservation. There's a question, have the discussion guides been sent? And the answer is yes. And I can follow up with you to make sure that you received that, Lorraine. And one clarification for, that's a good point in terms of thinking about the repository that we'd like to build is it's a multi-institutional repository. There's another question, will phase 2 project content be fed to Calisphere and DPLA? I'll answer it this way, in the sense that we are going to definitely ensure that the metadata and content that we would create that would be put into the multi-institutional repository would be able to be would be interoperable with the standards that come out of Calisphere and DPLA, and that would be our intent. And we need to start to get into the technical aspects now of making that a possible, how we would enable that to actually be harvested into those repositories. But yes, we will be doing our initial good work to make sure that everything is standards-based so that it could be put into other repositories like that. And I should say harvested, the metadata harvested into repositories like Calisphere and DPLA. Here, next question. Is there something written up about phase 2 that you could send out? Yes, I'll work with Janet Coles to send out some information about that. Can you give examples of types of collections you are looking for, not just photos? Could we clarify that? Are you talking about phase 1 or phase 2? I'll just wait for that. Sure. For phase 1, you know, I think that a good way to answer that is to talk about definitely what we're not looking at this point in time. That might be the best way. You know, some of you identified newspapers. That was a very popular local newspapers to be scanned, and the state library is essentially sort of recommending that those projects where newspapers were identified, that material work through the California Newspaper Project to get scanned. There's a little bit of a subtlety here. It just is about what we want to focus on. So we won't be focusing on newspapers in California Real Phase 1, but there are other ways to do that work. The same thing is true of let's say, sort of strictly audio and video preservation. Those materials would be directed towards the California Video Preservation Project. There's a slight subtlety here. I'll just sort of answer that many of you have put forward oral histories and materials that you have, where you have old tape, and I'd like to sort of address those within phase 2. You have legacy tape that would need to reel-to-reel cassette that would need to be preserved, and I'd like to deal with that within California Revealed. We may need to work with the CAVPP to help get that material scanned, but we'll work with it within phase 1 of California Revealed. Maps are definitely out of scope for us at this point in time. It's a very important resource, but it's something we need to do more thinking about in terms of metadata and access and discovery of them and the presentation. There's also things like many of you were suggesting that your city directories for possibility for scanning. And what we'd like to do is not do them in phase one, but to ask you to do more work in terms of identifying if they have been scanned or not. Because many things are actually already available through the Internet Archive or through some other databases. So one might think about those for application in phase two. So otherwise, the other thing to mention that is out of scope as well is our federal and state records. We will take a look at sort of county government records and look at that and get a sense of that with you as to what's there to be scanned and get a sense of that. So that'll be part of our thinking and work with you this summer.
Robin,
please.
You might want to mention your work with the teachers and some of the subject areas that they're looking at.
Certainly. Yeah, it's a good idea. Thanks, Liz. There's another sort of effort that's part of California Revealed that's running in parallel. I've been in June, early June, I met with a group of teachers and public school librarians. I had a group of 9 of these educators to talk with them about what kind of content that they are interested in seeing scanned, and to talk about some ideas about access to those materials. I'll address the last one first, which is just to say that they came up with some really interesting ideas for access that could potentially inform how we would build our multi-institutional repository and help us develop the interface into that. And then in terms of their specific sort of thinking about material, this is a nice sort of contextual piece, the material that we select to scan. There's a new California framework that is coming out this year, and it will be released formally in December of 2016. And it's a very extensive document. It's something like 700 pages long that teachers are being asked to teach to. The most recent previous publication was apparently around 50 pages long. So it's gotten quite expansive, and it's something that teachers are going to need some time to really dig into a bit more to really understand. And that was just a very interesting thing to share with you, an interesting thing that I learned. But what definitely came out of it is that there are major unit areas that teachers would, that they have to teach throughout the grades, 5th, 8th, 11th grade, that they would love to see sort of local content speaking to these sort of larger national events in our country's history. And they are going to develop and share with me a list of those large unit areas. And what we'll do during the interview process and the regional process is to work with you to sort of say, how do your collections that you've proposed map to those areas? That's another dimension to all of this. I don't know that it needs to be the final deciding factor in terms of what we scan, but I think it'll be a very interesting one for us to think about and gather more data on. Does that, Liz, do you think that covers it?
Yeah. Did you have any specific examples? I think you mentioned like Immigration,
Sure,
migration,
yeah, the
civil
Great
rights.
Depression,
Yeah, the depression.
desegregation, that exactly that kind of thing. You could imagine wanting to find materials that locally might speak to the civil rights era, or locally might speak to immigration in your region, or the Great Depression, for example. And those are the kinds of large topic areas that they'll be coming up with. There's one, Janet Coles asked me to clarify one thing about the libraries that we select to get funding for phase 2. I apologize, I misspoke. That it may be that most of the libraries will have at least one collection that we're able to scan. We're going to try to go for the broadest representation that we can, broadest participation that we can. So again, just to say that it may be that most libraries will have at least one collection. See, I think we have one last question here. Will preservation and rehousing of original documents and photos be part of phase 1? Digital preservation is going to be part of the planning that goes into phase 1. But I would say that it would be interesting to find out how many of you need rehousing of original documents and photos. That would just be, again, just good information to gather and to be able to pass on to the state library to see if that's actually a possible future effort.
Yeah, and actually it's one of the questions in the discussion guide, right, whether any preservation, rehousing is required. I'm not sure. I think once we find out what the current situation is, it might be an area that needs to be considered in phase 2. I don't know whether Janet wants to chime in here as to whether it's being currently considered.
Yeah. You know, I would just say that in terms of it, I think, and I'm not Janet, of course, but my understanding is our focus is digital preservation.
Right.
But I think that understanding, as you're saying, Liz, what the issue is terrific. And now I'll let Janet speak. Excuse me. She may answer on chat. In the meantime, we have another question. Oh, here she is. I've got the answer there. She'll be looking at solutions for digital preservation in phase 2 and beyond. And our goal is to develop solutions for all the services needed around digital preservation and access. So we have another question, which is, yeah.
Okay.
The next question is, any limits to how many libraries chosen for phase 2? That is a good question. I don't know that the state library has finalized its thinking on that yet. But again, that's a place where Janet could jump in. Are there any other questions? Here we go. Will there be a cost-sharing component if chosen in phase 2? That is another very good question, and I'm going to defer to Janet to answer that. Are there other questions from folks? While we're waiting, I hope that yeah, Liz and I are really excited about this. It's a new way of thinking about how the state library can support digital efforts, and I think this is I have to say the consultancy team is a really great group of people that I'm enjoying working with, and they have a lot of expertise that they bring to the table, and we're just very excited about having the opportunity to talk with all of you and dig more deeply into your capacity and the challenges that you're facing as we work to develop these plans for digitization.
Robin, one thing that we didn't address, and mostly I think it's because we talked about it yesterday in our meeting, was the participants, and it's not fully fleshed out, but how the participants are going to find out more about the project and where they can get copies of materials and things like that.
Yes, that's a good question. And it is I'm at the moment, what I'm going to do for phase 1 is I'm going to set up a sort of private access point using Basecamp, where all of the participating libraries will be able to log in and get access to materials, so that we will be sharing webinars, we'll be sharing tutorials, we'll be sharing lots of documentation, guidelines. Gretchen McCord has a lot of material that she would like to share with you that will help you as we think around issues about intellectual property. So I'll be setting that up. My hope is in the future to, and it'll probably, if we can build it, would happen in phase 2, to build a sort of information clearinghouse website where this material would be available for the participants and also for potential participants in the California Refield projects. But we'll also, we can definitely set up a listserv for the libraries as well, and we'll get that done too, where we can send materials out to anyone who's a part of the listserv. But it would also be nice, I think, to have a space where you can go as well and access the documents where you know they're always there too, and that'll be our goal with Basecamp. Janet, just in case, for the recording, she answered the question about cost sharing, and she wants to fund as many worthy projects as possible. The funding questions have not yet been fully worked out about cost sharing for phase 2. No, we're not anticipating requiring any matching funds at this point. Okay, any other questions? Right. Well, oh, thank you. Yeah, it was a wonderful wonderful launch, and I'll have the recording. We'll share it definitely via the listserv. Oh, there's another question. When will we know the dates of the regional meetings? Very soon. We are doing a little more work on those, getting our consultant team together around our regional meetings. So probably in the next, I'd say, week to 10 days, we'll have those available to share with everyone. Okay. Thanks everyone for all these great comments everybody's making. Really appreciate it. Like I said, we're excited about it, and glad to hear that it's resonating with you guys as well. All right, you know where to find us, and we'll look forward to talking with you more. Thank you all so much.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Robin?
Yes.
I
Cool.
took notes.
How about wonderful, and I'll call you, okay?
Okie dokie. Bye.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Bye. Bye.
Bye.